I'm excited to have you in here. I mean, you've probably been the most requested from the actual artists I've had on here. Really? Everybody, most of them have been your students, like Cannon Rogers, AG, Elijah, Tommy, Zach. I mean, I've had a lot of people. Jameson, and I listened to your episode with Jameson Tank yesterday just to do some research and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for those who don't know, David Barbe here in the building with me. You're known for being in bands like Mercyland, Buzz Hungry, and Sugar. Bob Mould from Husker Du.
The one and only.
That another section of my record collection my uncle gave me was a bunch of Husker Du albums. I'm kind of unfamiliar other than what he's given me, and I've only played him a couple times. But how did you get mixed in with Bob Mould?
Bob, when I first met Bob was in a relationship with a guy who's from Athens, who I knew. And my friend Kevin moved to New York, and he and Bob met and fell in love and had a long relationship. And anyway, they came down to Athens to visit and stayed at our house. We had a spare room in our attic. And it's funny because by this point, this is post Husker Du. I'd seen the Huskers play, and maybe Bob had just released Workbook, but we had to pull the door down to go up to the attic. But anyway, Bob and Kevin stayed in our attic, and we hit it off. And I probably did not escape his observant eye that I had every Husker Du album. And then once we knew each other, he saw Mercyland play once. We played we played a show at Maxwell's in Hoboken, which is a long story about everything that can go wrong for your touring indie rock band. But the one thing that came out of this otherwise frustrating and unfortunate episode of driving to New York to play for a label person that didn't show up.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And our amp breaking is that I borrowed an amp from Bob, who's the only person I knew in Hoboken, and then they came out to the show. And then
there you go.
About a year later or so, Mercyland broke up, and Bob asked me if I wanted to be in his new band, and that was Sugar, and there you go.
That was it.
Yeah, it's a little more involved than that. I mean, he started talking to me about it, but frankly, I was such a Huskers fan. I mean, they're really great. It's those. Are you familiar with SST Records?
It sounds familiar.
Okay. The whole indie rock thing that exists, to me, growing up when I did, seems like at the time it was very obviously a direct outgrowth of punk rock. Punk rock gave way to this totally different club scene in America, right? Mm-hmm. All over the place. And in Atlanta, the Sex Pistols played in Atlanta at the Great Southeastern Music Hall. And when I was in high school, we heard that there was a punk rock band in Athens, and they were called the B-52s. It's just funny to think about the B-52s as a punk rock band. Yeah. But what it meant is it's new wave. They're not Journey or Boston, Styx or something. It's which is funny. That's a lot of the massive records when I was in high school. Not into it, way too processed. What I was into was the Stones, the Beatles, our friend Bob Dylan here next to us, Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, and a lot of 60s garage rock. And then when I heard punk rock, I heard my friend David Wilkins turn me on to the Jam and the Clash, was oh, this is because I was scared of punk rock when I first heard about it when it happened, and I was about 12 or something, because it was the news reports said, it's a type of music that wants to kill rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, my friend David Wilkins explained to me, no, they want to kill the kind of rock and roll we hate. They love the kind of rock and roll that we love.
Yeah.
And then you hear, and then he plays The Clash, and I was like, oh, that's punk rock. I love that.
I'm in.
Yeah, The Jam. I love that. And so I was into all those bands: The Jam, The Clash, Wire, The Buzzcocks. And then you there's these offshoots of that in the late '70s: Gang of Four, Wire, Television. Television actually predates all that really, but to me it was learned later. Actually, the Butthole Surfers turned me onto Television when they were living out by the airport in about 84, 85, I guess. They don't remember that.
Are they from around here?
No, they're from Texas.
Oh.
But then they moved to Athens in 84 and lived in this house out by the Athens airport. And, it was definitely something different to have in Athens at that time.
Yeah.
It's, so it's like all these little new wave scenes that sprung up around the country were, in their own way, kind of outgrowths of this like new wave music that was happening. Elvis Costello, Joe Jackson, whatever. And like they're kind of big, but not like arena packing big. And in Athens, we all know the story. B-52's Love Tractor Pylon, REM, right? Gave birth
Mount
to this,
Rushmore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is pretty much. Gave birth to this music scene, which kind of makes me think, while I'm on the subject, that if Love Tractor hasn't gotten a star downtown yet, they certainly deserve one. They should.
Yeah, you would think.
They are like those are the four like kind of Mount Rushmore.
I mean, those are the ones I seem to hear about the most.
Yeah.
Obviously, REM.
Yeah.
And B-52s.
Yeah, they had it going on, but so the punk rock scene, it basically was like more really could be better defined as it would be now as DIY, right? And it took different shapes in different places. In southern college towns, it became, like in Athens, it became the flourishing scene here that came out of those bands, which are all a little different than each other, yet somehow at the time also all kind of fit together in their own way, just mostly in the fact that they were just like all creative. There's the North Carolina, kind of Let's Active DBs scene. In DC, it's like hardcore, the Minor Threat, et cetera, Discord Records. But in LA, it went from these, from these early punk rock bands into, bands like X, and by the early 80s, SST Records. And SST Records was founded by Greg Ginn, who's the guitar player in Black Flag, not Big Black. That would be Steve Albini.
I was like, Steve Albini.
Sorry.
Right.
2 more sips of coffee and I'll have my story straight. But Black Flag, and they signed, and so like they ended up signing a bazillion bands, but the kind of 4 core ones on SST were Black Flag, the Minutemen, Meat Puppets, and Husker Du. And
you love the Minutemen, right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, Double Nickels and the Dime is my favorite record of the 1980s.
Yeah, I remember you saying that on Jameson's podcast.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to listen to it since.
Double Nickels and the Dime is like every kind of rock music made to that point in time condensed into 42 like minute to a minute and a half songs.
Whoa.
With highly intelligent and impassioned lyrics. It's a Bible of how to be in a band, is what it is.
Whoa.
When we were in Mercyland, that was we're in it again now, but when we were originally in Mercyland, that was like, that just seemed like the good book of indie rock touring was Double Nickels and the Dime.
Yeah.
It's
you said 40 songs?
42 songs.
Oh my God.
It's but SST, it's like it was essentially, it's like these are hardcore bands is what it was billed at, because that is what had come out of punk rock. But Black Flag fits the bill as a hardcore band. The Meat Puppets' first record appropriately titled Meat Puppets 1, absolutely is a hardcore record. But Meat Puppets 2, which is a landmark record, has more of a artistic relationship to Neil Young's Zuma than it does to it's like a marriage of the 80s hardcore punk and Zuma. But it's it's a tremendous record. Double Nickels on the Dime, I've just extolled the virtues of that.
Yeah.
And then Husker Du, like the first couple of Husker records, Land Speed Record is as hardcore a hardcore record as it gets. But as the records evolved, it's like this great songwriting emerged into where it's even by like Metal Circus or Zen Arcade, those were like at the time were regarded as hardcore records, but like the songwriting of Bob and Grant Hart is so incredible that those I don't even know how I got off on this thing about SST, but those records really like were a huge part of like this like indie rock landscape. And so it's cool. It's like in that time there was just from all different parts of the country, everybody had their scene. But like Husker Du and REM were friends, like and the Replacements also being from Minneapolis, where the Huskers were from. Peter Buck played on a Replacements record, played on Let It Be.
Oh, okay.
Bob Mould played Ticket to Ride with REM somewhere one time. The Minutemen opened for REM. The Minutemen and Husker Du toured together. It's interesting, like they're kind of cross genre. But so I was really into all that stuff, and so when Bob finally veering back to the question you asked in the first place, what did David Barbe talk to you about? Well, nothing, just a bunch of meandering crap.
No, it's okay. No, that's what this is for. Is meandering around and figuring out what we want to talk about.
So he started talking to me about playing together, and I just couldn't really imagine that, even though we were friends, that Bob at his level, because at the time he was touring with his Bob Mould band, which was Tony Mamone on bass and Anton Fear on drums, who were the two guys from Pere Ubu. And Anton sadly passed away now. Tony owns Studio G in Brooklyn, which is an amazing studio. But it's like they're big time guys, man. Mm-hmm. And I had been playing in this like scrappy punk rock band, and was like driving a delivery truck and recording bands. Like the foundation of my career is like 4-track cassette recording.
Right.
It's like what Canon does. You know? It's like that's what I was working on, is 4 tracks. And there's no such thing as Pro Tools, and the only way you could have like a proper studio is like expensive studio equipment.
Right.
So I was making 4 tracks and going to studios with bands whenever I could to produce what I could. And Mercyland had just broken up, and I really didn't know what I was gonna do. I was in my mid-20s, and I had a baby and a pregnant wife, and I drove a delivery truck, and I made $5 or $6 an hour or something. And even then, that's like a stretch for somebody that's just responsible for themselves.
Yeah.
For somebody responsible for 4 people, it's a bit much, But anyway, he just kept on asking me about it, and then in the interim,
is he pretty insistent about getting you in?
It was funny. It's like I was never sure exactly what he was asking me. I thought he wanted me to like just jam with him sometime, or hang out, play music. It took me a while to get it through my head. That's what he was asking. And then by the summer of 91, I was already starting to work at John Keane's studio engineering. And once I was out of Mercyland, it was like a week later, John Keane called me and said, "Do you want to learn to be an engineer? I need somebody," because he knew about all the 4 tracks and me coming over there with other bands all the time and telling everybody what to do. And I said, "Yeah, I want to learn to be an engineer." So that sounds great.
Nice.
And then And then like shortly after that, us and Bob kind of made it clear that like that's what he wanted was for me to play in his new band, which was just going to be the Bob Mould Band. And then we jammed for a couple of weeks in early '92 here in what's now Rook and Palm, but it was just like the basement of the tire shop at the time.
Oh.
And Pylon had a practice space down there. We used their stuff. And anyway, we so we did, and then Bob said, this feels more like a band thing to me than a solo and accompaniment. Let's just call it Sugar, and there you go.
Sweet. He had the name ready to go too.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I was like, wow, that'd be amazing if he was like,
this may have had it ready to go and was feeling it out. It
Right.
may have occurred to him while we were doing it. I kind of think that he had the eye on it. He is like so many great artists, highly intelligent and has a plan, knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And Husker Du was basically self-managed, and most of Bob's career he's been self-managed. He had a couple of periods where he had a period in the maybe about 10 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago now, where he was managed by this San Francisco guy, Jordan Kurland. He manages Death Cab, and who's great. He's fantastic. Whoa. And
Yeah.
and he's a great manager. He and Bob had a good thing, but Bob has always been kind of self-run. He's got an attorney, and he's had for years, and the same booking agent, Frank Riley, the man who basically built indie touring in America, and as his agent forever. Frank books. Frank's agency, I don't know if it's Frank or his guy Matt Hickey who works with him. They booked, Wilco, but like in the '80s, they booked The Replacements and Husker Du and 10,000 Maniacs, and basically everybody except REM and the American touring scene was booked by Frank at his then place Venture Booking with his partner Pat Magnarella, who now for the last 30 years has been the manager of Green Day. I mean, those guys had it going on. One of them went on to be this epic manager, and the other one wanted to be this epic booking agent who, High Road Touring, who still has an incredible roster of acts.
That's awesome.
And always stays current. It's amazing. Like 40 years into Frank's career, that guy's always current. But he's been Bob's guy from the beginning. But so, yeah, I think that Bob probably did have like a pretty clear concept of what he wanted to do, and probably needed to feel Malcolm and me out as players first to see if the vibe was good and if we felt like the right band.
Yeah.
And then once we did, we drove to Stoughton, Massachusetts, and recorded 26 songs. About 10 or 12 of those became Copper Blue, and then 6 of those became Beaster, and the others were like just a bunch of B-sides and leftovers and things.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. How much of that time period did you learn about recording? And I know you also own Chase Park Transduction, which is a legendary studio here in Athens, Georgia. How much of that time period kind of influenced the way you run a studio now, and what have you learned the most about owning a studio, and like what makes a successful studio keep going?
Everything affects that, and that early 90s time really did have a big impact on me. I grew up in recording studios with my parents. Whole life been in recording studios. So when I was a kid growing up in Atlanta, Master Sound, which was first over where the North Druid Hills train station is, man, I feel like my childhood of, I knew what like a giant multi-track, 2-inch tape, or 1 and 2-inch tape machines. When I started, there was probably down there, it was probably half-inch 4-track or something in the mid '60s. But I was a little kid, not when I started working, when I started being a child. But and Doppler and the Sound Pit and all these places in Atlanta that I would go with my parents. So I always was around studios and was into studios. And then when I started playing in bands more seriously when I was in college, because I was playing in bands like the whole time, but I recorded the first so-called album I recorded was when I was 12, and I have this 1/4-inch 4-track from the early 60s. It's a Roberts 330. I still have it. It's like a tube 1/4-inch tape machine, and I recorded my band on that when in 7th grade, me and 3 8th graders, and we made a cassette of our album and sold it at school.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very
Been in
sick.
the music business a long time.
Yeah.
So I was always
Since
into
middle
it.
school.
And then all through high school, I was always recording on that in the basement. And then when I got to be in college is when the first 4-track cassettes came out. And I bought one from this guy, Alex Marquez, who he might still live in Athens. And we played in bands together in high school and stuff. And I bought this thing from him. And then once I was like, oh man, you can do this on cassette. It's all in one little thing. Mm-hmm. Then I was going. And I always thought, truly believed, that I was better at this than I probably was, which is healthy. It's good.
Yeah, you have to feel that way.
I mean, you've got to assume that when Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday were in the gunfight at the OK Corral, they didn't go in worried that they were going to get shot by the Clanton brothers. They went out there assuming they were going to win. They did win, in case you don't know the history of the gunfight at the OK Corral, 1881, Tombstone, Arizona.
Okay.
I'm not going to go off on that right now. But
I don't know anything about this.
No, I've been thinking lately about how many things that are colloquialisms, known historic events are just gradually lost to time.
Eroded.
Yeah, there's things that, so I think about indie touring in the 80s, and it's no interstates in the 50s when my dad toured. Right. We had interstates. My dad toured in the 50s, no cell phones, no road maps. I mean, they had road maps. Sorry, no GPS, right? No fast food, no drive-through restaurants, no chain hotels. By the time I toured in the 80s, there's Motel 6, there's McDonald's, we know that. There's the interstate system.
Right.
There's maps. There's no GPS. There's no cell phones.
It's so funny to think that there was no highway.
There's no internet. Right.
Can't even imagine
it's
that.
it used to be in the 50s, driving to Atlanta from Athens was US 78 through Stone Mountain, right?
Yeah,
when I came
crazy.
to school, it was 316, but it stopped at Georgia 8, where the big quick trip is.
Oh, okay.
That was the end, and you got on what's Georgia 8, but used to be Highway 29 that came in by the old Pepsi plant, which is not the Pepsi plant anymore. See, now I'm doing this thing. I read this thing the other day about, on Father's Day, about what's your favorite sad dad band say about you. And then I read, somebody sent this to me, and I'd just driven home from the lake, had been up water skiing, and I had a Pavement shirt on, and I read the one about Pavement.
Yeah.
Dad.
I had the Pavement record out there.
I just saw that, and the Pavement dad was like, your kids' friends like you, but they can't help but notice that you frequently point things out in their town and mention that it used to be something else. I told my sons, and they came over, who also both love Pavement. And I was like, it's a little on brand.
A little too accurate.
A little on brand, yeah. So
Pavement rules, though. It took me a minute to get into them. I just didn't quite know how to feel.
It's so
the
great.
The first one I heard was Spit on a Stranger from Terror Twilight.
That's some late period. That's like hearing Abbey Road as your first Beatles album.
Right, yeah. It was, and at the time I loved it, but I learned later that was a strange starting point compared to Crooked Rain or Wowie Zowie or whatever.
My starting point with Pavement was Dave Marr, still playing music around Athens now as a singer in the Soldering Boys later. He had just moved from Chicago to Athens, and I recorded maybe not his band, but his roommate's band on my 4-track, and I went over there to mix it, to mix the cassette over their stereo speakers. That's how I was working. We will tangent back to me getting started recording in the early 90s, but it relates to this. I was just absorbing music, but Dave had just moved down here from Chicago, and he asked me if I knew about Pavement, and I was like, no. And he goes, are you familiar with Drag City, which was their label before Matador? And I was like, no. And he said, my friends have this label, and this band's on their label. And I was like, what does it sound like? He said, it sounds like the Fall playing Rolling Stones songs. I love the Fall, and I love the Rolling Stones. And so he played me one of those 7 inches, like the Watery Domestic EP or something but some 7-inch that came out before Perfect Sound Forever, and was just knocked out by it. And then right after that was when Slanted came out. And was totally into that. And then I saw Pavement play. I mean, I saw them play when they played in Atlanta recently, but I saw them play a few times, and they were always great shows. I feel like I saw them here once. Sugar and Pavement played us, and Sonic Youth and Pavement played some basketball arena in Paris in December of '92, and which was prime time Slanted tour. And then another time I saw them with Superchunk and My Bloody Valentine at the Ritz in New York. And
that's crazy.
Yeah, and so it's like Loveless is like at the time is
one of
not
my favorite
a thing.
albums of all time.
Yeah, and that's what me and Bob were really into when we started Sugar. Was Loveless we listened. Bob played me Loveless for the first time when we drove to
What was that
New York.
like when you first heard that?
Mind blowing. What I told him is like, this is like a bunch of kind of music that I love, but that's like none of it.
Yeah,
it's like Magical Mystery Tour and the Cocteau Twins, and like super grubby rock and roll that I would later come to identify with things like Spaceman 3. And you listen to them?
No. Oh, that sounds familiar.
Parker,
Spaceman
you need to get
3.
it. Are you familiar with Spiritualized?
Yes, I have one of their albums because it came with like if you bought a 4-pack from like Not Drag City or something like that. It came with like a random album, and that was one of them.
Well, you should definitely check out Spiritualized, ladies and gentlemen. You are now floating in space.
Yeah, I have listened to it.
That's a killer record, but before that, the main guy was in Spaceman 3, which is this like pretty epic English 80s band that
so Spaceman 3 was before Spiritualized.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, but yeah, so I saw Pavement, My Bloody Valentine play one time, and I knew
that's wild.
I had like connections with all three of those bands, like Mac and Laura. I knew through like Mercyland days and stuff, and then coming to Athens to play, and then Pavement. I guess I can't remember if this is before or after I'd met them in France, but they had stayed at the Brooks and Laura from the Jack O'Nuts house here when they played here, and then My Bloody Valentine, Bob introduced me to them. I saw them another time. I saw My Bloody Valentine and Dinosaur Jr. play in Boston at the Avalon when we were making Copper Blue. We went up to see them, and all those bands, they love Husker Du and they love Bob. And so we went and said hi to all of them at that show. And so like I always kind of knew them a little bit peripherally, not like
right.
I mean, Kevin Shields and I weren't like going fishing or talking about the Braves or something, but it'd be a great, amazing conversation.
Yeah, that would be.
Or like cricket or something. But
was he pretty cool? He seems like a quiet guy.
Yeah, he's a quiet guy. And when I would see them, I would end up talking to Colum, their drummer, a little bit more. Who's like because Bob and Kevin would needed to like geek out about being like indie rock guitar heroes. It was cool though, but it's funny. My console at Chase Park, I have 2 rooms, but my A-room console is a 70s Neve 5316, and like Neves are like the, it's like the people that are into studio stuff, like an old Neve, like a real one, not a reissue, not a new one, not something that's original. Built to sound like, but the OG stuff, all the custom built ones, especially before 76, like through 75 was when he owned the company. It's like all the OG stuff. So I've got one of those, and I remember Kevin and Bob asking Kevin, what frequencies do you like to use what have you been doing when you're mixing your guitars? And Kevin mentioned like certain frequencies that he liked to boost on his guitar tracks. Yeah. And I've noticed that 2 of the frequencies that he said he likes to use are actually 2 frequencies that are on like Neve EQs. They're not like sweep around and find the frequency. It's like click, click, click. You have select frequencies. Yeah, select frequencies, right? And so the 2 of the things he talked about are both like Neve EQ preset, like click stops. Yeah. And when I got that board, and I was like, I wonder if he was using these EQs. Right. So anyway, what it all gets back to is in that time period when I was in Sugar and thereafter, I was already working in studios, but I didn't have a studio, right? So I thought about this the other night. It's like, how many studios have I worked in? And I think the number is greater than 50. And all over the world. And so because I was already working in studios and I was really, really into it, we went to Boston to make Copper Blue and Beast, or Lou Giordano, who engineered those records, who's so great. And we went to this place, The Outpost. And every night after the session, Lou and I would talk about engineering stuff. And Lou would sometimes give me homework. He'd give me an article, or a technical article to read, because in addition to being a great mixing engineer, Lou was maybe his degree is electrical engineering, but he went to MIT. And so he understands the science of all this very well.
Very cool.
And so I was really into it. And then whenever we would go to, like, we went to England, did BBC stuff. We went to Japan and Germany and did, like, radio and TV stuff. And you'd be in a studio. I'm always checking out the studio. I'm always asking questions. I worked over at John Keene's when he was on Hillcrest. And then this is all that same time. While I'm in Sugar, I go to England for 2 weeks. I come back for 2 weeks, and I make like 3 indie records. And then I go to do like half of the U.S. for 3 or 4 weeks, come home for 2 weeks, take my kids trick-or-treating, make 2 records, get back in the car, no bus when we were in Sugar, and not in the U.S., at least, only in Europe. And then go do 3 more weeks of touring, home for Thanksgiving, make a record, go to Europe for a month, come home for Christmas, do Christmas, make about 4 records for a couple of weeks, go to Japan for 3 weeks, home for 3 months, make like 10 records.
Yeah.
Go on tour, because Beast, we recorded 2 records at the same time. But that's what it was like for that whole time.
Right.
But since I did not have a studio, I made tons of records. I made records that built my career in this time period. In this time period when I was, before I had Chase Park, I did 5/8 Weirdo in that time. I did records with Daisy. I did records with the Jacko Nuts. I did side one of one. There was 2 sides. One of them, obviously, there's 2 sides to their record. Like Steve Albini did one, and I did one. Like, we were both working with a lot of the same bands.
Whoa.
I did this band from Atlanta, Fiddlehead, who's just starting to re-release their early stuff, and that I did in a studio in Atlanta, Bosstown, which later became Stankonia, the Outcast place. But now, at the time, it was owned by Bobby Brown, and it's this giant place that had like 3 control rooms and a great big room. And these punk rock band, Fiddlehead, had more post-punk fare, had or booked time and wanted me to come engineer it, because there's this band from South Carolina, 134, that had recorded with me, and told, it's interesting how all this stuff works. The Jacko Nuts were a band from here that I'd recorded on my 4-track, and then I'd gone to mix them at another studio at Kelly Noonan's Sweet 16, and they told 134 about me. 134 booked a session with me. John Keene's was booked, so we went down to Full Moon in Watkinsville. That's what I was doing. Was I started at John's, but John worked 5 days a week, and I'd be off tour, and I had by now 2 babies and a third one following right behind. Shocker to me, and needed to work. Mm-hmm. And my choice was, well, you're off tour, you could just take it easy. It's like, have 5 mouths to feed.
Yeah.
And that's not one of the options. And it's either I can go to any of my support jobs that I had, which at the time was working at Kinko's, now FedEx, but it was Kinko's over on Baxter Street. And then I just realized, it's like, if I could just work, and if I just had more studios I could work in, because John's busy. So I had a circuit. I had like half a dozen studios in Athens. Kelly Noonan had Sweet 16 on Linden. Scott Stuckey had it might just be called his name, over on Boulevard. Robbie Collins, Underground Sound, over off Lumpkin on Princeton. Tom Lewis had Rocket Sound on Millage. Full Moon had just started in Watkinsville. Mark Maxwell on Best Drive. So I had about 6 or 8 studios in Athens. Andy Baker had Rock Central just around the corner from here. He later became my partner in Chase Park.
Okay.
And so I had a circuit of studios in Athens where I was booking sessions. And it would be like, somebody calls me up and it's like, when do you want to do this? How much money do you want to spend? And so I went to all these studios in Athens and said, charge your regular rate, pay me 1/3 of that. And I'll bring bands in here and I'll book the days that you're not booked. And to them, it's like, most people realize this is a good deal, because I had the bands. It's like, you got a gas station, but I've got all the cars.
Ah, okay.
So I also needed to, the motivation for this was very simple. I needed to make money and not spend any. Again, with the babies. And I was working on this frantic pace because I was always squeezing it in between tours. all of this turned out to be better than anything I ever could have planned to do, because what it did is most people, when they want to start recording, they buy some stuff and they learn how to do it. They've got an interface and Pro Tools and some speakers, and you learn to do it, and you know, and your friends all do the same thing, and everybody works in their own bubble. The fact that we can do this now is remarkable, incredible, power to the people. I love it. But my experience is different. That didn't exist other than 4-track cassettes.
Right.
I needed to make money, and I had this developing skill, but what I was really doing was learning how every piece of studio equipment and every microphone worked and sounded, reliability, room design, business practices, everything. So I had my circuit of about 6 or 8 studios in Athens, and then Fiddlehead asked me to go do this thing in Atlanta. And right away, I loved going down there. They had an incredible mic collection. And like Studio A was this enormous place where they had the control room there was like a lot of Atlanta R&B music. And you'd see people making massive hit records in this place. And but they used a control room and 64-channel SSL and 48-track open reel digital recorder and like one microphone, right?
Wow.
At a time.
Yeah.
And then Studio B was like a 40-channel SSL. I mean, I think Studio A at the time in Bosstown was $2,000 a day plus your engineer. Studio B, this is $90, was $1,000 a day. And then Studio C was this closet with a cheap board, but you could bring all the gear you wanted in there because Studio B was like all mixing. And it was a great place to work because you'd be in there. Like, I love these big old multi-room studios, which is kind of why Chase Park has 2 studios in big cities. And I grew up going to these places in Atlanta with my parents. Like Master Sound, by the time they moved to Spring Street, downtown Atlanta, had like 4 or 5 studios in there, right? Okay. And I love the vibe of those places. Sunset Sound is like that. Sound Emporium in Nashville. That's just how the old studio model was. Right. EMI is like that, you know. And so I was working in like the local studios in Athens, but then I started working these bigger places in Atlanta. And that thing at Bosstown, the drummer for Fiddlehead was a high school senior named Kyle Spence, who became the drummer in Harvey Milk and is now Kurt Weill's drummer and has his own amazing studio in Athens now. That's awesome. But even at 16, 17, and however old he was, I realized this guy has a gift that you can't teach and you can't learn. He's still like one of the greatest rock drummers I've ever been around.
What's played his name?
His name's Kyle Spence. He lives here still. We've played a bunch. He's gone a lot now because he's busy with Kurt.
Right.
But that 45 I did down there accomplished 2 things. One, it got me a ton of business because people heard that thing and are just like, oh my God, the drums on that thing. It's like the best.
Which 45?
It's this thing called Dodd E by Fiddlehead. And the reason it's called that is because their van was a Dodge, but the G fell off. And the other thing that's accomplished is it put me in a massive room with a bunch of great microphones. The room, my dad told me that room was built in the 60s by this guy, Joe Shelton, as a film studio. Then it became Soundscape. And then the guy that owned Soundscape sold it to Bobby Brown, and he was married to Whitney Houston, and that's who owned it when I was working there. Before we went bankrupt, and then the federal marshals seized it, and then Andre and Big Boy bought it, and that's who owns it now.
Gotcha.
So, but like, it was also, for me, it's like, I now am freelancing in Atlanta, and I'm working in one of these big time places with all these other big time people. And so then I expanded my world into Atlanta, and I was working in all these other studios down there, and it ranged from indie places to great big places like Triclops, and then I just became friendly with all the studio people because it was the combination of, they know who I am now because I'm making known records. I'm in Sugar, which is kind of a big time thing. I'm coming to Atlanta and working in studios, and I'm a freelancer who is recording rock bands like people had recorded rock bands in the 70s because there's something that is more common now, but I was doing at the time that was not common practice, and with drum recording. And so I was just getting tons of work. And
so people wanted a very specific sound that you were getting with the drums.
Yeah, which is usually rule 1, get a great drummer. Rule 2.
Yeah, it's a pretty good place to start.
Rule 2, do it in a good room. Then you get to the gear. You know, it's I didn't make this up, but somebody told me about some engineer they know being asked how they get if they could get the Led Zeppelin drum sound, and he said, "Yeah, all you need is a plane ticket to England and a shovel." So, but what I was doing is very Zeppelin oriented because, like, I watched Kyle play his drums and realized this guy is like John Bonham or Keith Moon. And so just put 2 room mics out in the room because, as I referenced when I came in here talking about records, one of my favorite albums of all time is Led Zeppelin Physical Graffiti,
right?
Which is their least processed sounding record. Tons of guitar layers, but that like open, natural drum sound. The record that I was most into, and it's funny, that's how I got this fiddlehead job, is Mike Haggerty, the fiddlehead, called me. Hadn't seen that guy in 30 years, and we actually exchanged messages last night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's funny. We should be talking about this. But he said, "What kind of drum sounds are you into?" I was like, "Well, I'm like holding a baby." And I was like, on my turntable is Slint Spiderland. That's my favorite record right now. And then in my cassette deck in my truck, and like went out and like popped it out. I had like the phone with like the antenna on it, like the landline phone.
Yeah.
I was like, "Is Led Zeppelin Physical Graffiti?" And he just said, "I don't know if you're any good at this, but you're a cool dude. You're hired." I was like, "Great."
So hell yeah.
But so I was into these really natural, non-digital reverb drum sounds. And coming out of the late 80s, it's like a lot of these records, even like local people, it was all these like shotgun snare drum sounds, just, you know, like John Cougar, Scarecrow, like that kind of hue, Born in the USA. It's like people are going for that. Like, and to me, it's like it sounds too processed. It doesn't sound real. Pixies, Surfer Rosa. This is before I knew Steve, but I heard that record and was like, I knew Steve Albini from being in Big Black, and but I heard that and was like, that's the right idea. That record's amazing.
That's one of my favorites ever.
Me too. And then I heard Spiderland, and Brian Paulson, who I had become friends with too, did that, and was just like, I'm not the only one. Like these guys, it's interesting. These guys were all about the same age, and went to State U to go to college, and then like it's funny. Steve went to maybe to Montana, where he's from, to study journalism. I came to Georgia to study journalism.
Very similar
thing. Brian, was in Minneapolis, went to college, and then got for recording bands. Same story. But so the point of all this is that I had developed this circuit of studios, and so I had about 12 in Atlanta and 6 or 8 in Athens.
Right.
And what it was is you come to me and say, "We want to record. How much money do you have, or what kind of sound do you want?" It's like, "Well, we love the sound of that fiddlehead thing, or we love the sound of the 5/8 record, or we need a piano, or we only have $800, or whatever it is." And it's like, okay, this is my day rate. I can get this studio for this. And I would just like put it together. I just had a menu of studios. And I expanded that out to where it's like over the years, I still do this, like, right? So I still, Mitch Easter's Fidelatorium in North Carolina, love that place. Sound Emporium in Nashville, Phillips in Memphis, Fame down in Muscle Shoals. This summer I'm going to be in LA at Gold Diggers in a few weeks doing some stuff, and then just got really comfortable going to any studio in the world and walking into the room, and it's just like it could be 1/2 inch 8-track, 2-inch 24-track, Pro Tools, modular digital multi-track. It just got at the point, Neve console, API, SSL, Mackie, Surface controller. It just got to the point with me where I could walk into any studio in the world and just look at it and go, okay, that's the recording system. This thing is the thing you mix all the sounds together on. Where do the drums sound good? And just do you know how to align your tape machine? And where's the coffee maker?
Yeah.
How does your patch bay work? And then other than that, it's like, I got it. So
Gotcha.
I had developed, without really realizing it, I had just developed this just encyclopedia of knowledge of rooms, gear, little things like chairs for the control room, patch bays, patch cables, mic stands, guitar stands, business practices, just whatever, just
accumulating all this information over the years.
And so when in 95 was the last Sugar tour, I had told Bob about the middle of 94. It's like, I love you. I love this music. I love doing this. This has been the greatest opportunity in my life. But I now have a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and I kind of would like to jump off the merry-go-round whenever it works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you give me this great opportunity. I'm not like saying, here's my 2-week notice.
Yeah.
It's like, you tell me when, and I'm good. Like, I'll fulfill any obligation that you want, and then if you want to get somebody else, I'll show them my parts or whatever. And we talked about it, and then he just kind of said, I kind of wouldn't mind just taking a break from this for a while, which turned out to be the end of the band. And and then we picked a time about 6 months in advance. It was going to be the end of the second Japan tour that we did, and which was wonderful. I love going to Japan. So we finished that, and then I had a couple of years in there where it's now we're going to see how good I am at this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't have
like a real test.
Sugar touring to fall back on.
Yeah.
Now I'm completely supporting my family on hand-to-mouth indie rock, envelopes of indie rock cash. And so I was really pedal to the metal recording bands. I mean, my life was like, what am I doing this week? Okay, I am going to Bosstown for 3 days to track a band. Then I'm going to go to Full Moon on Thursday because they got a piano and they're going to do some piano tracks. I'm going to come back to Athens Friday and Saturday. I'm going to mix it at John Keene's. I'm taking off Sunday. Monday, I got to drive to Nashville to master something at Masterphonics. But I have to come back that night. I'll drive up and drive back because Tuesday I'm going to Columbia, South Carolina to record Ghetto Blaster in somebody's basement over there, and then I got to come back because I'm going to go to Rocket Sound and record Harvey Milk. But fortunately, Harvey Milk and the Martians are back-to-back days, and Kyle's playing drums in both bands now, so I'll just stay set up over there. And then I'll go back to John's on Saturday, and then and then it was just
you
like
just had your hand, like your head in the sand, like making it
working
happen.
Man. And so 2 things happened. One philosophical and the other that fed my family for a year. The one that fed my family for a year was I had a publishing admin deal with Bug Music, which is now part of BMG in LA. And Eddie Gomez, who was my guy there at the time, called me and said, he'd always been really great to me. And he said, hey, Katie Lang's making a new record and she's looking for songs, and this is the kind of thing she's looking for. And I think that like your melodic sense might be really good for her voice. And I never would have thought of this. Do you have anything? And I told him, it's like, man, I've got an idea for a song. I've got like 2 lines of it, but it's exactly what you're talking about. So I finished this song, got Tom Lewis to come to my house to like set the vocal level. So I recorded a little demo in my basement and then took it to his house and got him to set the vocal level. Don't let me make it too low. And she put it on her record, and it's like a gold record. And so like that was a huge thing to have, like place a song on a big time artist's record.
Right.
And then the other thing, the philosophical breakthrough was I really need a regular place to work. Just for the aspect of having a family, it's like I know so much now about studios, and I also would buy like 1 piece of gear or 1 microphone at a time. But most people, things like speaker stands, cables, I didn't buy any of that.
Right.
Power amps, didn't buy any of that. All I bought was the killer stuff.
Of course, yeah.
Because I'd had, like, the first piece of gear I bought was a Summit 2-channel tube mic pre that I still use on every record I make at Chase Park,
wow.
even with the Neve. The next thing was these 2 API mic pre's that my buddy Carl Plaster found the cards in a milk crate in a radio station in Boston and sold me 2 for $100 each. And I got this guy, Brent Averill, who now has this massive BAE Brent Averill Enterprises thing making mic pre's and stuff, but I knew who he was. Sent them to him. He put them in a little rack. Bought a couple of really killer old tube mics, some Coles ribbon mics, but because I didn't have to have like stands and stuff.
Yeah.
All I bought was A-list only, and buy and hold. Only buy the stuff that you're going to keep the rest of your life. And so I got the idea, I want to build a studio. So I kept looking for places, and everything was falling through. And my buddy Andy Baker, who now runs a studio in Taipei, was looking for a place too. And we would compare notes, and I was on the phone with him one day, and he was telling me he was in partnership with Andy Lamaster, who I had met a couple of times. I recorded Andy playing mandolin on a record I did at Full Moon. And Andy Baker and I recorded all the same bands. He recorded the first Drive-By Truckers. For the Drive-By Truckers date the beginning of their band going over to Andy Baker's house, just around the corner from here, and recording. Okay. 5/8, Harvey Milk. I mean, all these bands we both had recorded. And I was on the phone with him one day and just had this idea and asked him, what if you made money when I worked? And he said, what do you mean? I was like, we record all the same bands. What if every time I recorded one of those bands, you made some money? And he said, that would be great. But how would that exist? And I said, here's how it would exist. You can't find a studio. I can't find a studio. What if we just pool our resources and just do it together? And he said, would there even be time for that? And I said, do you work 168 hours a week? It's the same pitch I'd use to people when I was a freelancer. It's like, you can't work 168 hours a week. We can work at different times of the day or at different days of the week. And it's like, do you think it's going to be too much of a traffic jam? I was like, it'll be a temporary space until we can each figure out what we really want. But we'll have a little temporary space that'll get us both going, because he was getting kicked out of his house. I needed a place to work. He had a board, and I realized, like, man, all I really need is like a 2-inch machine. And then he said, well, I'm in partners with Andy Lamaster. And at the time I was in my early 30s, and Andy was in his late 20s, and Andy Lamaster was probably like 21. He was very young. And I told him, I know Andy, and I really like Andy, and he's a talented guy, but like, I'm not sure what he brings to the table. And that, because it's like, you and I it's like, we are competitors for the same work. And he said, I know he's young, but I know him better than you do. I really believe in this guy, and I won't do it unless he's in.
Wow. And
I loved Andy Baker, and it was just like, you know what? That's all I need. I'm in. And of course, Andy Lamaster and I have now been studio partners for 26 years.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is like, right away, to Andy Baker's credit, he told Andy Lamaster that I'd said that. And so the three of us met, and I was like, good, I'm glad he told you. We should talk about this. Make your pitch, because I know what I'm bringing to the table. By this point, I've worked in 50 studios. Right. I've made tons of records. I've been in the club level, highway pounding Mercyland, and I've been in the sellout, the Palladium level of Sugar. I know what I'm doing. Or thought I did. I always think I do, but I probably never do, really.
I mean, we're always learning. But
right. Yeah,
of course,
keep on growing.
You get some experience.
But I had experience, right? And so we just went for it, and we built our temporary place, Chase Park Transduction, which has now been in operation for 26 years.
Wow.
But when we built that place, all this knowledge of rooms and gear, suddenly it all came to fruition. David, what do you think about this piece of gear? It's like, man, those things are awesome. We should get one. What about these? Everybody loves them, but they're totally overrated. They break all the time. Here's something else that's way better. It's super cheap. People don't like them because the meters are ugly. But I'm telling you, I've used this thing in this studio, in this studio, in this studio. What do you think about MCI JH24 tape machines? Just like, it depends on the IC chip that's in there, because there's some of them that have red ones, and the red ones blow all the time, and you have a lot of downtime. They're easy to replace, but it's a pain in the butt. Yeah. And part of the reason they break is because those machines, the electronics are in these like old school like computer drawer things that slide out, and they get moved too much. So it's like, it's like, the Atari's easier to align because the alignment's all on the front. But like, I just knew all this stuff from working in all these places and every kind of gear, every kind of microphone, the room design, the Chase Park tracking room. That's why the stuff sounds like it does, that people like coming over there. I drew up the basic shape of it on a piece of notebook paper. And then we taped lines on the floor. And then 2 adjustments to the design were made by Pete Sackett, who's the carpenter that built Chase Park. One was, there was one run of wall that I had. There's 2 basic physical aspects for sound that I understood that made a big difference. And then Pete gave me 2 ideas for structural integrity of the space. He said, if you don't put an angle here, if could this wall be straight, because it'll be structurally better. And was like, and just, Dot looked at it and was like, yeah, that'll still work. And then the other was the roof design, which he said, what if we just built it kind of like an old barn roof? And so essentially we built a house inside that warehouse. Andy Baker had read a bunch of books about control room design, and so I had thoughts on this, but he basically took the lead with that. And then in 2000, after we'd been there a few years, I got Wes Lachaux, who's an amazing studio architect, to look at the Chase Park control room, because I thought, I work in these other studios, the control room could be a lot better here. And he said, tear it down, start over. And I was like, okay, great, when can you start? So we tore down the control room and rebuilt it to its current state in 10 days without a professional construction crew.
Whoa.
Why
did you have to tear it down?
To redesign the whole shape of the thing to make it sound better. And that's what we did. And that's what we got now. Both control rooms are built off his blueprint now, and they sound amazing. My favorite, sonically, they're my favorite. I mean, it's my place, but Wes's design, they're my favorite control rooms I've ever worked in.
What was the big difference between the original and then once he told you to change it?
The basic concept of the shape was not that different. His was just a lot more dialed in mathematically.
Oh,
and then he understood things like, where do you put absorption? Where do you put reflection?
Right.
Where do you put refraction? Where do you put diffusion? And he just understood like music and architecture, and was just really a brilliant guy. And that was a huge game changer for us. And what we realized, and it's funny, it was that, man, our like odd, notebook paper design tracking room, it's like, it sounds unique, but it sounds great. And now that we can hear it clearly. And it was really fortunate. And we did it like that because from the very beginning of Chase Park, we were booked up all the time. Like when the summer of 97, when we opened, we, and this is funny, back to the freelance thing, I had to fly home for the studio opening because I had been working on a Sunvolt record in their practice space in Illinois.
Right.
And so I was like flying to drive. I flew home, but I was usually driving out to Millstadt, where their practice space was, and like recording them for a couple of weeks and coming back. So we started building the studio. I went and did Sunvolt for like a week, came back, had the party for the studio, and the next day got on a plane, flew back out there to go to work more.
Yeah.
But it was a cool time. And so we were so busy that when we first opened, I worked 10 to 6, Andy Baker worked 6 to 1, and then Andy Lemaster was the vampire. And because we all had existing clients that we had to hold off, and so when the studio was finally open, and we said, okay, how do we introduce this to the world? And it was $30 an hour for everybody all the time.
Wow.
2-inch 16 track. And I had my cool gear, and it's like, let's just get it going. And so we made so many records at that time because it was going around the clock. And so the records I worked on at that summer, I know that 2 really stick out. One is Harvey Milk, The Pleaser, and another one is Bloodkin, Out of State Plates. Just about, I just remixed that over during COVID once I got the Neve, and it's about to come out on vinyl for the first time. It's
cool.
A great record.
Nice.
And the first Matcha album, we did that right around that time, but it was an amazing summer. We were just like booked all the time. And so 3 years later, when we decided to redo the control room, again, we were so booked up with records that we realized it's like every day we're closed. We're not just paying to build. We are losing money
that you could be
and
making.
So it was insane how much work it was. But we worked from like 8 o'clock in the morning until like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then go to bed and get up and do it again.
Right.
And the rule was you finish work, go outside, play wiffle ball, drink a couple beers, go home, get up the next morning, do it again.
Nice.
And it's like, especially after demo day of like swinging a sledgehammer, knocking walls down and stuff.
Yeah.
Man, you want to talk about sore. But we got it done because it's like we had to get it done.
That's amazing you did it without a construction crew.
Yeah.
To do that.
One
by
carpenter,
yourself.
Pete, and then a couple of times like we got somebody that knows how to finish drywall to come in. There was not much exposed drywall, but we got somebody that knows how to finish drywall to do that, because when we built the tracking room, we realized that's not a skill we have. Mm-hmm. Acoustic panels, we got about 10 friends over there and said, this is how you build an acoustic panel. And so it was like a barn raising, just showed people how to do stuff. And Wes was like a tireless, because he was down here and he really wanted to get it done and go back home too, I'm sure. So, it was pretty amazing, really. And then in 2005, we built Studio B because the world was all getting Pro Tools in their bedroom, and studios were closing left and right. And as I've done several times in my career, when everybody else gets out of something, I'm doubling down.
Yeah.
I'm just going to gamble that I know the market is shrinking, but I also know the number of competitors is shrinking because people are freaked about losing. And a desire to succeed and a fear of failure are different. Like, one is built on self-belief and the other is built around desperation. And it's hard to be good at anything when you're desperate. So I just believed we have so much work and there's so many talented people in Athens. If we had a second studio, we could invite all the cool young people that record music in Athens. Just record it at Chase Park. We have this killer tracking room. We'll have 2 control rooms. You can use all our great gear. There's 10 billion of you now with home studios, and so it's going to be awfully hard for you to get ahead because there's so many of you eating the same food. You're all drinking off the same water supply. And you can all make cool, frankly, amazing music at your home studios now. The possibilities are incredible.
Yeah.
But there's certain things you need a big room for. There's certain times that it's just like, hey, turns out the actual cool gear sounds better than a picture of the gear on a plug-in. Well, we have an algorithm that models it. It's like, I know that. I got that. And that stuff's great. But when you hear the difference of the two, people still are like, the real stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, the real stuff sounds great. That's why I have it. And I have plate reverbs and like a dozen tape machines and 2 mini guitar amps. And God, I just bought my 5th Ampeg Gemini 1 2 days ago because I love them so much.
You have 5. Wow.
I do now. Yeah, one of them's in North Carolina. I got to go get it. But anyway, and it's just like, we'll let you guys book the room out cheap for you so that you can come over here and work. And I'll answer any questions you have. You can take your tracks to your house and do your time-consuming overdubs at home.
Wow.
You can mix them at home, or you could come back here and mix on the boards. You can. I'll tell you anything you want to know. You can steal all my ideas and tell the world you invented it. I don't care. You're not going to hurt me. I'd rather have a smaller piece of a bigger pie. We're better if we have an open community that shares information. Because, Parker, if you and Tommy and Annie Leith and Ryan Engelberger and Drew Vandenberg and me all record the same band at the same time, if we said, hey, we are going to have Hefner record a version of Subterranean Homesick Blues, and we're all going to do it at Chase Park, and we all have 1 day each to record and mix this song, and at the end of the week, we're going to have a party, and we're going to listen to them. It's the same band playing the same song in the same room. And I can tell you right now, if we did that, they would all be totally different. Because it's about your ears and your heart and your understanding and your feeling It's a human element, right? And so most studios and studio people can be very territorial, very proprietary. And to me, it's like I've never been that way. It's just like if, no matter what I'm doing, if you can beat my ass, then hats off to you. You just did it, and there you go.
Yeah.
But I just don't feel that way. I just feel like we can all do this. There's plenty of room at the table. There's all, we're out of soup. Put a cup of water in it. Extend it.
Yeah.
There's only this pie. I was only planning on cutting into 8 pieces. What if you made a little bigger pie and just cut slightly smaller pieces? We all could have some. And so that turned out to just be a great idea. So a friend was selling some gear. I bought his gear. We rented the space next door. We had a brilliant control room design. We called Wes, and he gave us some ratios that we could use to build a small secondary tracking room in there. And so then since 2005, we've had both studios going. And like they're going right now. And my original vision of these young people working over there, 2 of the people I just mentioned in my last example, Annie Leith is recording a band in Studio A, Ryan Engelberger's in there today recording a band in Studio B.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, Annie will be finishing up with that band, and then Annie Lemaster will be in B mastering a record. And then it's just like this week, I was in A mixing, Jason Neesmith was in B mastering, Drew Vandenberg was over there mixing some stuff. And it's just been...
in constant
rotation. It's worked great because everybody... And the other thing is like my freelancing model is something everybody else has adopted too. And so it's funny, I recently had to book a session at 1093 because my own studio was double booked. And it's like Trampled by Turtles came into Athens and they wanted to record a song for a movie or a TV show or something. And their label guy's a friend of mine and said, they're cool guys. Could you help them out? And I was like, yeah. And they called me and I was like, man, my studio is booked. We need to do this one song. We can't possibly get in there. And so I called the new owner of 1093 and he was like, yeah, come on over. So it's,
I worked out. Yeah.
So I just kind of encourage this collaborative effort and figure I will just do this as long as I can until the world no longer wants me to. Like I've always felt like I will, when I got out of Georgia, which was in 1986, my goal was I want to do rock and roll. I graduated college and my graduation job was working at the Milledge Avenue taco stand. And I told my mom and she was like, why are you doing that? And I said, because I need a job I don't care about. I mean, I care about the taco stand. I eat there all the time.
Right.
But in the grand scheme of things, I need a job that isn't my calling in life so that I can really devote my time to what is.
Yeah.
And then just was like, man, if I could do music for like 3, 4, 5 years out of school, I would be, you got big mice in this place. I would,
yeah, their names are Tommy and Zach.
I would be, if I could get 5 years of making rock and roll before I have to, leave Neverland, that'd be great. And that was 37 years ago.
Yeah.
And so like, I already kind of won, I feel like that or continue to. And then it's like, sometimes somebody else asks me if like, it's like working at UGA, there I have to do these, like I learned, there's all kinds of things I've learned because I'd never had a job before other than like places like the taco stand or filling cracks in parking lots, but my whole life's just been rock and roll's been my job, And somebody asked me about like, well, in your line of work, do you ever do a SWOT? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, that's a strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. And I was like, well, I can only do a SWO. I don't do threat. Like, I don't feel threatened by anything ever. It's just don't want to, And, but she was like, you don't feel threatened by anything. And I was like, I am the threat. Like, I don't care. It's like I never feel threatened by anything. I just feel like I will do what I love to do as long as I can do it. And there will come a time where, and this is another thing about having all these young people work at Chase Park, it's better for me personally. I have new ideas and new philosophies and new creative energy and new people coming in there all the time. And the other thing is, let's face it, the age of the bands in Athens stays relatively constant, but mine does not. And I want to constantly be embracing new ideas and new things in life anyway. Too many people, my friends my age are like locked into the same records, although I did pick one that I left to have out here with us, but still.
But yeah, you get stuck in a
and it's like,
time period.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
Gotta keep on moving. Life's too interesting. Life's short. There's too much to embrace. Things change. People change. It's just like, there's just so much to absorb. It's, this morning I've listened to this like African record that's this instrument that's like a harp that I don't even know what the name of the thing is now because I only learned about it last night.
Okay.
I need to start listening to that. I listened to some blood-pumping EDM while I was on a bike this morning.
Okay.
And then I listened to a little bit of a record that I've worked on that has just come out today, which is the remastered, expanded Drive By Truckers Dirty South. I had to listen to 2 songs in the car on the way over here. Just to like, it's real. It came out today. And
right,
it's just
right,
like,
of course.
And there's always that moment when you pull up your own thing you worked on to listen to, and you're like, whew. Sounds pretty good.
Yes, yeah,
sounds fine. It's there.
But
the point is like having like I just figured that like I keep getting older and the band's all just there's plenty of my age too, but there's always new ones that stay the same age.
There's always a new wave,
right?
Coming
and
in.
So I don't want to lose touch with all this cool new stuff, but I also know that like all this cool new stuff, they want to work with cool new people like themselves.
Right.
And if I have a studio that provides a platform for that, we get to exist. And at some point in time, the world will find a hopefully nice way of letting me know, okay, Pawpaw, off to bed. And you've made your contribution, you're done. So, but I've already done this for so much longer than I thought I'd get to.
Yeah.
That I just feel incredibly grateful that I still get to be even like remotely associated with cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, you built such a hub for things to brew and stew and happen in a beautiful local environment where everybody seems to be very communal and of the same mindset of like, if we can just have a bigger pie, we can cut the smaller pieces and then everybody can eat and everybody can learn new techniques and how to do what you've been doing for so long. And you've already given so much of your time and I'm very grateful, but I do have a specific question.
All right, I'm ready for a specific question because I've just rambled on aimlessly for a long time. It might be like the next day by now. You're just
dumping gems on all the listeners here. But I am a huge fan and might say that it's certainly my top 5 favorite albums of Halcyon Digest. And I didn't know until last night that you were very much involved in that record. So
yeah.
Deerhunter, one of my favorite bands ever. That album specifically, and Microcastle is amazing. What was that experience like? What can you recall from your time there? Like, what was Deerhunter like in the studio? What did they do really well, etc.? What did you learn?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Halcyon Digest. I engineered Halcyon, and I also did Weird Eras, which is that one that's in Microcastle. Mm-hmm. I love Deerhunter. I love all their records. I love those guys. I love all the records I've made. I don't know how many albums I've made, 400 or something. And picking a favorite's like picking a favorite child or a favorite food. But there is a tiny group of albums I've worked on that are at the tippy top for me. And Halcyon absolutely is one of them.
Of course.
It's just like a perfect record,
Yes, yeah.
And
I've probably listened to it more than any album in my entire life because it has been in my car for 5 years and I can only have one CD in there. So it has just been the one in constant rotation that comes on as soon as I turn on my car.
What are your favorites on Halcyon? I'm kind of curious about that.
It is funny because it is one of the albums that because it's been in my CD or it's the CD in my car, I know it by the track numbers, more so than the names.
Of course, we're all that way.
Yeah, but Memory Boy, or is it
Memory Boy? Was when we did Memory Boy. That was one of those songs that was just like when we were working on it was like I was just blown away by how great the song is.
Yeah,
Bradford wrote that. reflective of a time. Now, if I get this wrong and he hears this, he's going to be like banging on my door and yelling at me. But
well, if he hears this, Bradford, please come on the show. Let's talk about it.
My memory of Memory Boy is that like it reflects a time when his parents were splitting up when he's a teenager, and there's this guy that come over to his house. They're hanging out, and he came over every day. And then I remember he kept wanting the vocal levels to be lower, and Ben Allen wanted the vocal levels higher. And Bradford got my then 16-year-old son, Henry, who was helping us in the studio that summer, to sit in the chair and listen to it. And he's like, play. And he told me, he's like, David, play one line, that October. Stop it. Henry, what did I just say? That October, he came over every day. Okay. And then now play it again. I play it, and he goes, joints on jeans, and then we'd play. And stop. What did he say? He said joints on jeans, and then we'd play, which is like rolling a joint on your jeans. And it's with like the bass harmonica and but like that song, and then my son sitting there in the chair with Bradford, where Bradford's like, this is the person. These are the people that I want to hear this song. It's like if he says the vocals are loud enough, they're loud enough.
Yeah.
Bradford is he would have been a great general. He came in with they had demos of his songs and Lockett's songs, and we recorded the album in the order of the album in sequence.
Oh, whoa.
Earthquake was the first thing we did.
First one. That's crazy.
And Ben built the drum track on Logic off of what Bradford made on his home demo.
Yeah.
And then Bradford did the vocal in the control room with all the lights off and all his pedals singing into like a handheld mic, and with me and Ben in the control room, and he's working the pedals while he's singing, and we're all like closer than you and I are now. It's like, do you recall waking up on a dirty couch? Revival was another one that we recorded three different times, and because Bradford just couldn't get happy with it. And the version that we did not pursue, but that would have been great, he demonstrated for Moses how he wanted the drums to be, and that guy is a great drummer. I mean, like his drumming style was like a Motown drummer, and it was just like that boom, ba-da-da, boom, cha-dum-dum, just like the super bounce to it. And Ben and I were in the control room, and we're talking about it when he was playing, and it's like, we could record the version of the song like this, but it like might break their band up. It's like nobody but you and me are ever going to hear this, but man, he's a great drummer. He's just like showing how he wanted it to be. We got almost done with two different versions of the song, and then Ben would logically say, wait, why don't we finish this version before we do something different? But Bradford's like, that's not what I'm looking for. And just like stop, and we'd start all over again. And the third one was The Charm. Sailing, we did that a bunch of times, including one with me playing the bass and Josh playing piano or something like that. We just like the middle of the night. Basement Scene was recorded by Henry in our basement on his cassette 4-track.
Whoa.
Because Bradford asked me, he's like, could we go over to your house and record? Does Henry where does he make his 4-tracks? Like at our house? Do you have a basement? I was like, we do. He's like, does he make his 4-tracks in the basement? I was like, yeah, that's like his little home studio. And Bradford said, okay, this song is about that time of being like a teenager making recordings in the basement. I want to go have Henry record this at your house in the basement. So Henry, 16-year-old Henry Barbe, has a production credit on it's pretty. Look at the liner notes.
Best
it says
albums of all time.
Yeah, it's like produced by Ben Allen. Basement Scene produced by Henry Barbe.
Yeah,
and then that's what we did. The four of them came over to our house and set up in the basement and recorded Basement Scene.
That's a great one
down there. And then I love the whole record, but
I'm curious about Helicopter. And Coronado, those two are maybe.
Yes, the Coronado, Bill Oglesby, they said, do you know somebody that plays the sax? It's like, yeah, Bill used to play sax in a bunch of local bands called Bill. He came over, and then I had to go type up or print out like a work for hire agreement for him, and he played the song. And of course, a Helicopter is like such an epic, like anthemic.
The sounds are so strange.
Yeah, and most of those created were to match what Bradford had in his demos. of it.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, there's both Lockett songs, Fountain Stairs and Desire Line. Fountain Stairs, I remember him telling me like he was going to Georgia State and he had left his book on the stairs by this fountain, and then just, I left my book on the fountain stairs.
Yeah.
And then Desire Lines switched to me. Like Desire Lines is like Cecile Duncan, who was one of my students and used to work at Merge Records, and now she's in law school. Cecile told me she loves that record too, and she said, Desire Lines is like the indie rock Freebird. And it's like, and Desire Lines is one of my favorite things I've ever recorded by any artist ever.
Wow.
There's just something about that guitar tangle at the end of it. And so I've also...
it's like, how many layers of guitars are going on there?
Yeah, it's a bunch. And I think by the end of it, it's all like 10 tracks of Lockett or something. But it was like, we did the whole thing, in 2 or 3 weeks, and they went to Atlanta to Bend Studio to finish. But it was really a tremendous experience because I love the band so much. Bradford is extremely mercurial, but a lot of his outbursts, I think, are designed to elicit response from people.
Gotcha.
And there's one time he was like really just like dog cussing the entire room, and then he like wheeled around and everybody's kind of looking down for a second, just kind of browbeat, and things weren't going well. And he just looked at me and he winked and he kept on going, yelling at him. And it was just like, what a genius, man. And
he does seem like a mad scientist.
He is. And I will tell you that Bradford and I have always gotten along like a house on fire. Like from the very beginning, we just got along great because like the person who's probably most influential in me getting started doing stuff that I actually like and thought was cool is Laura Carter with the Barbecue Killers. Not the Elf Power Laura Carter. They're two different people. But she was just a punk rock explosion. And we were like super close friends. She has passed away now many years ago. But working with the Barbecue Killers, she was like mercurial, go from one thing to the next, and unconcerned about how other people do things or logical processes. And so, I always like Betty Levette. I made a record with her and the Truckers down in Muscle Shoals, and she could get extremely angry, like several times a day. And she also drank champagne all day long, which probably doesn't help.
Yeah, that'll do it.
It's but but in those situations, I love working with people like that because their creative fire just burns so hot. And it's like other people shy away, I think, from people that are like that. But I love working with them. And if they're going to have their ups and downs, I mean, that's fine because it's like the ups are worth the downs, It's like, what do you want? Do you want to have it easier? Or do you want to record the greatest stuff possible? It's like, I want to record the coolest stuff possible. I want to record greatness. And there's a difference in perfection and greatness. And there's a difference in greatness isn't always easy. And if the price of capturing somebody's greatness is somebody's temper tantrum or somebody that can't show up on time or somebody that needs to change directions constantly, it's like, then that's just the price. It's like people complaining about ticket prices, which we won't go into because we would talk about that for like 5 years. It's like, then don't pay it.
Right.
Then don't pay it. It's like, well,
nobody's forcing you.
Yeah. Don't do it. Do something else. Get a time machine and get a quarter and go back to the 70s and play pinball. I mean, whatever. But it's interesting because Bradford and I have talked several times since about working together again, but it's never happened. And I had a mutual friend tell me, they said, I don't know if it could because Bradford sometimes needs people that he can scream at and dominate. And they just said, he never would do that to you. You guys because we really like each other a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm really, really happy that I got to work on those two records. Weird Eras is what got us to know each other, which set the stage for me doing Halcyon.
Yeah.
And then Halcyon was very last minute. Ben Allen called me and had the record, and Ben had made records at Chase Park before, and he knew we'd already worked together, Deerhunter and me, and they liked it. And so it was like, super last minute and was like, let me start moving things around.
Wow.
And so,
did you have a feeling going into it that it might be something huge? Because
I thought it would be something that was great and could be a record that people like, because people loved Microcastle so much.
Yeah.
But once we were making it, it was like this is really great. I mean, from the beginning, you could tell like Earthquake is like so cool, but by the time we made Revival, it's like, this is like a hit song, man.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, once it came out, it was this just like the response to it, like, Pitchfork reviews, things like that.
9.2 or something.
Yeah, it was
crazy.
just like an insanely. You just realize, like, man, you just made one of those records. Like,
right.
And sometimes you don't realize it until you're in it. I mean, when you're in it, you don't realize it sometimes until you're done that it's like,
you're so close to it.
Yeah, this is one of those records. And what set the stage for it too is Myriad Post Pavilion. The Animal Collective had come with Ben and mixed that at Chase Park the year before. And
that was the year before.
Yeah, or 2 years, maybe 2008 or something. And
I want to know all about that too, because that's
those
also
guys,
in my
those
top
guys made
favorite.
that, recorded that at Sweet Tea in Oxford with Ben, and then they came and mixed it at Chase Park.
Right.
And I was the assistant on the mix sessions to Ben.
So you were there while they were mixing it.
But they really didn't need much from me. Like, those guys are really self-contained unit of brilliance. And a lot of times I was just thinking, it's like, I'm just an extra person in here right now. So I would be in there helping them with things, but mostly it was like patching things in and dialing things up that they wanted, and then getting out of their way, and then answering Ben's questions and making sure they had what they needed. Because I just felt like, as much as I want to be in here involved in this, there's sometimes it's like, I feel like they just need, those guys would be like on the couch with their chaos pads, like running stuff down like live while they're mixing. It's incredible.
Whoa.
Those guys are nuts in a great way. And then Bradford loved that record and loved those guys. And so, that was a good run for us to be doing. Like the Chase Park output over the years is pretty good. It's like, we've got some Animal Collective, Merryweather Post Pavilion, great.
Yeah.
Halcyon, great. Faye Webster Records, great.
Yes.
Future Birds of Montreal, great.
Which of Montreal records?
Drew Vandenberg's done a ton of them.
Oh, okay.
And
their output is so big.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to know which one to like dive into first. I've kind of tried a few of them and I like them, but it's hard for me to find which one is like my really solid entry point.
Yeah, but that's true of any artist that has so many records.
Right.
Drive by Truckers Records, obviously. All kinds of cool, weird things like Illies, these, that I love. Then records by like, kind of like legacy artists, Betty LaVette, Booker T. Those Betty's record we made at Muscle Shoals, mixed at Chase Park, nominated for a Grammy. Booker's record, Rob Schnopf, who did all the Elliott Smith, or a bunch of Elliott Smith records, did that with Booker. We did that at Chase Park and tracked all that there, and then Rob took that to his studio in L.A. and mixed that out there.
Got
it. It's been it continues to be a good run, and hopefully there's somebody over there making something super cool, like right now.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody is, and I'm sure there's going to be more and more incredible records coming out of Chase Park over the years. Like I said, you've already been blessing me with some amazing knowledge, and you've been here, you've given a lot of your time. I really appreciate it. We do a section where we do a last five.
All right, last five.
Where
I have no idea what this is.
You just pick out a little piece of paper, 5 of them from here.
All right.
And
I'm going to get one at a time. And as my mother, proper Southern lady, born in 1928, said, David, you take the one that's closest to you. Doesn't matter if there's a bigger piece of cake across the plate. I'm going to take and give you my gut instinct first.
Let's do it. Yeah. Number 1.
Song you wish you wrote. Immediate instinct answer. Gates of Eden, off Bringing It All.
Gates of Eden.
Code.
You got it locked in. Number 2.
Best, worst,
Decade of music. I've got terrible handwriting. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I like that. In reality, my favorite time of everything is always right now because I might learn something.
Great answer.
So I'm going to stick with that. I could go off at some other decade, but I'm going gut instinct. I love now.
Cool.
Always. Dream artist producer to work with, Neil Young.
Ooh, you locked in. You had that ready. Number 4.
Because you don't know what you get. Could be anything. Underrated artist at the moment.
Yeah, who do you think should get a little bit more shine?
This is a good question. I didn't have a gut instinct. I'm going to punt and just get a different one.
Okay.
I might come back to that. Underrated artist at the moment. Because, like, now I'm thinking of, like...
So many to choose.
Yeah. You know what? I got an answer for you.
Okay.
And my favorite band to go see right now is basically Nancy from Savannah.
Yeah,
and I
saw
love
them at
basically
41.
Nancy, and we made an EP together that's not out yet.
Oh, wow.
That actually has a Neil Young cover on it too. And
Cool.
I think they're great, and I think they're going to do good stuff. And
I
so
saw
that's
them
my
at
answer.
Trash Fest when Hefner put that on.
Fantasy supergroup.
Let's go.
Do I get to be in this group?
If you, yeah. Why
Okay.
not?
Do I have a time machine too?
Sure.
So it can be...
It can be anybody ever.
Okay,
Let's
great.
try to keep it to maybe 4 or 5 piece.
It's 5-piece because here is the fantasy supergroup ever. It is a time machine that lands in like any time between 1968 and 1969, and Bill Wyman is no longer the bass player in the Rolling Stones. David Barbe is.
You're just inserting yourself into the Stones.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay, sick. Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
All right, so
I mean-
it's just the Stones plus you involved.
Yeah. Arguing about the Beatles and the Stones is like hamburgers and bratwursts or Miller Lite versus Coors Light. It's like
They're both great.
they both work.
Yeah.
I see you're wearing a Braves hat. I frequently can busy my brain with things like the Atlanta Braves all-time starting 9. And the problem is you get into the outfield and you got 4 guys. And somebody's got to sit. Mm-hmm. And, it's like Hank Aaron, frankly, Acuna. And then you got to pick between Murphy and Dale Murphy and Andrew Jones. And it's like, I don't want to pick. They're both great.
Right.
Okay, so the Beatles and the Stones. I know that the Beatles are perfect.
Yeah.
The Beatles are perfect.
Hard to argue with that.
Hard to argue with the Beatles. They're the greatest thing of all time. The Rolling Stones records are spotty. That is, there are probably, 25 or 30 or 40 Rolling Stones albums. Who knows? Mm-hmm. There are probably a dozen that are truly great records.
Right.
There are a couple that are, man, these would be any other band's best record. Aftermath or Some Girls for sure. And then there's 4 records in that little window I talked about in the late 60s and early 70s that are as great of records as anybody's ever made in the history of rock and roll. And the Beatles' collective output is better.
Right.
But if I was in the Beatles, they would just be worse. And
Yeah.
the Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, and Exile on Main Street, every time I hear that music, there's some songs that in a positive way just make my blood boil every time I hear them. And That's why I get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'd be my super group, is me playing bass with the Rolling Stones.
Let's make it happen. It's still possible.
Well, Mick and I met one time at a studio in Memphis, and we were very friendly. Yeah. So
whoa.
And then I went to see him play after that, because it's like, well, we're friends now. I kind of got
yeah. I mean, we're besties.
It was great. And he was scouting locations for a movie he was making about the life of Sam Phillips, and it's not every day you're at work and Mick Jagger comes in the room, and so I never chat up famous people. It's you never say, hey, Mick, I really love Let It Bleed. It's like he already knows that.
Yeah.
You all do.
He's heard it a million times.
And so I almost didn't even say anything. And he's been there for a little bit, and people showing in the studio and everything. And I'm just, I was producing a Drive-By Truckers record. That's what I was doing over there. And so there's a moment where it's just 3 people in this little bitty foyer room between the studio and the control room at Sam Phillips. And it's me and Mick and one of his security guys. And I thought about it and realized, this is your moment.
If you're going to say anything.
And so I asked him, Mick, is there a polite way for one to ask for a picture? And he said, you just did it, mate.
Aw. And
we got this picture, and then we chatted for a minute. He was very nice. But what really struck me about him was that at 75 or however old he was, it's like, this guy is totally alive. And I'd never seen them before because I was scared to. I was scared that it would be some softened up Vegas review version of the Rolling Stones. And it's like, those records I said I like, it's like Let It Bleed, like Gimme Shelter, Midnight Rambler, Bitch, Sway, all down the line, Salt of the Earth. It's like, this is not like Vegas review music. This
you don't want to hear it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I want the dark energy. And when you were around him, you realized, this guy's still pushing. This guy's still alive. And there's some people who like, they pleasantly turn into the grandpa version of themselves, which is great. The world needs that too. And embrace who they used to be. There's some people that still have that push to keep going. Dylan, Neil Young, Paul McCartney still does it. Somebody that I actually spent an afternoon with that was like that, William S. Burroughs, which was pretty incredible. And but then around Mick, it was just like, man, the devil's still there. He's still. And so that's when I was like, I got to go see him play.
Yeah.
And so I tried to go see him play in 2019 when they were touring, and I even bought a frequent flyer plane ticket to go to Jazz Fest because a friend of mine had a spare ticket. And then Mick had heart surgery and they canceled. No call, no text, but
Can't believe it.
And so, but it's crazy. Small Worlds, I went, so I'm going to go to Jazz Festival. I'd never been. I went down there and then realized while I was there that night after the festival, he's playing at the House of Blues, Deerhunter. And
there you go.
Pop just showed up at their show and popped backstage, just like,
what's
hello,
up, guys?
I'm here. But anyway, I did see the Stones, and they played in Phillips in 21. And it
was great.
Yeah, all they need is me playing bass.
Right, that's all they need.
Right.
So Mick,
there you have it.
Call in. David, Barbe, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a blast getting to chat
it.
with you. Yeah, let's do it again sometime. I appreciate you giving your time, giving your knowledge. It's been awesome, and I'm sure everybody's going to love getting to listen to this.
Yeah.
Thank you again, David.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Thank you again for tuning into the newest episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. Remember, not only can you listen to the episodes on Apple Podcast and Spotify, but you can also watch the episodes on my YouTube channel, which is linked in the description below. And on that note, I'll see you guys next time.